Ladies, let me tell you something that will change the way you communicate with a man. If you consider yourself a high-value woman, you have to understand that your power is not in how loud you speak, how much you argue, or how many demands you make. Your power is in the way you carry yourself, the standards you maintain, and the way you communicate when emotions get high. A high-value woman does not speak to a man from desperation. She speaks from self-respect. There is a difference between saying, "Why don't you ever do anything for me?" and saying, "I need consistency in a relationship, and that matters to me." One sounds like an attack. The other sounds like a woman who knows exactly what she needs. You see, a man can respect a woman who has standards. What becomes difficult is dealing with somebody who changes those standards depending on her emotions. If you say you need honesty, then stand on honesty. If you say you need consistency, then stand on consistency. If you say disrespect is unacceptable, then don't tolerate disrespect just because you are afraid of losing somebody. And ladies, stop thinking that communication means saying everything that comes into your head. Everything you feel does not have to become an argument. Sometimes maturity is knowing what needs to be said, when it needs to be said, and how it needs to be said. A high-value woman can tell a man, "That hurt me," without trying to destroy him. She can say, "I don't agree with that," without humiliating him. She can say, "I need more from this relationship," without begging him to become somebody he doesn't want to be. That's strength. And here's another thing. Don't use silence as a weapon, and don't use communication as manipulation. If you're upset, say you're upset. If you need space, say you need space. If something is bothering you, address it. But don't create confusion just to see whether he will chase you. A mature woman doesn't play games to prove she's valuable. She knows her value before the man ever walks into the room. And when you speak to a man, learn the difference between expressing your expectations and trying to control him. You can tell a man what you will accept without telling him who he has to be. You can have boundaries without becoming controlling. You can have standards without becoming disrespectful. Say, "This is what I need in a relationship," not, "You better do what I say." There's power in that difference. A high-value woman also knows how to appreciate a good man. Don't become so focused on what you want that you forget to recognize what he already does. If a man shows up for you, acknowledge it. If he supports you, appreciate it. If he makes an effort, let him know you noticed. Men don't need constant applause, but everybody wants to feel appreciated. And ladies, never confuse being independent with refusing to receive love. You can be strong and still allow a man to contribute. You can have your own money and still appreciate a man opening the door. You can make your own decisions and still value partnership. You don't have to compete with a good man. You don't have to prove you're stronger than him. A relationship isn't supposed to be a competition. It's supposed to be two people building something together. But here's where your communication becomes powerful. Learn to speak directly. Don't expect a man to decode hints, moods, social media posts, or silent treatments. If you want something, communicate it. If something bothers you, explain it. If you need reassurance, ask for it. If you feel disconnected, say it. "I'm feeling distant from you lately, and I'd like us to spend more quality time together." That's communication. "You don't care about me anymore." That's an accusation. One invites a conversation. The other starts a fight. And understand this, your tone matters. You can be right and still communicate it the wrong way. You can have a legitimate concern and lose the entire conversation because of how you delivered it. Being a high-value woman isn't about winning arguments. It's about protecting the quality of the relationship while protecting your own dignity. You should never have to scream to be heard. You should never have to insult somebody to make your point. You should never have to threaten somebody with another person just to get attention. And you should never have to beg somebody to recognize your worth. If a man consistently ignores your needs, your responsibility isn't to explain yourself 100 different ways. At some point, you have to watch his actions because words tell you what somebody wants you to hear. Acts tell you what somebody is willing to do. A high-value woman pays attention to both. She doesn't spend 6 months arguing with a man about something he has already shown her through his behavior. She doesn't keep lowering the standard because she is emotionally attached. She doesn't confuse potential with reality. She can love a man deeply and still recognize when the relationship isn't healthy for her. That's what self-respect looks like. And when you communicate with a man, don't constantly compare him to other men. My friend's husband does this. My ex used to do that. Other men would treat me better. That's not communication. That's disrespect disguised as motivation. If you want something from your man, tell him what you want without bringing another man into the conversation. A strong woman doesn't need another man's name to make her point. She can stand on her own words. And when you disagree, don't attack his character. Address the behavior instead of saying, "You're selfish." Say, "When this happened, I felt like my needs weren't being considered." Instead of saying, "You never listen," say, "I need you to hear me before we try to solve the problem." Instead of saying, "You're just like every other man," say, "This situation made me question whether we're on the same page." That's how grown people communicate. And understand something else. Respect has to go both ways. You cannot demand emotional maturity from a man while constantly disrespecting him. You cannot demand honesty while telling half-truths. You cannot demand loyalty while keeping somebody else around as an option. Your standard has to apply to you too. A high-value woman doesn't just ask, "What kind of man do I want?" She asks, "What kind of woman am I becoming?" Because you can meet a good man and still lose him if you haven't learned how to communicate, compromise, listen, and respect. Love isn't just about finding somebody who makes your heart beat fast. It's about learning how to build peace with somebody whose heart you care about. So speak with clarity. Speak with confidence. Speak with respect. Don't shrink yourself to keep a man, but don't disrespect him to prove you're strong. Know what you bring, know what you need, know what you will and will not tolerate. And then communicate those things without fear, because the right man won't need you to become smaller for him to feel like a man. And the right woman won't need to make a man feel small just to prove that she is valuable. Two secure people can speak honestly without turning every conversation into a battle. That's the kind of communication that creates trust. That's the kind of communication that creates respect. And that's the kind of communication that allows two people to build something worth keeping. Ladies, one of the most powerful things you can bring into a relationship is knowing who you are before you ever ask a man to recognize your value. When you know your worth, you don't have to walk into every conversation trying to prove yourself. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to threaten to leave every 5 minutes. You don't have to remind a man how many other men want you. Your confidence speaks before you ever say a word. A woman who knows her worth, understands that having standards is not the same thing as being difficult. There is nothing wrong with knowing what kind of treatment you deserve. There is nothing wrong with saying, "I need honesty. I need consistency, or I need respect. Those aren't unreasonable demands. Those are the foundations of a healthy relationship. But here's the key. You have to communicate those standards with confidence, not desperation. Don't tell a man what you need because you're afraid he's going to leave. Tell him because you're making him aware of what it takes to have a healthy relationship with you. There's a big difference between saying, please don't leave me, I'll accept anything, and saying, I care about you, but this is what I need in order to feel respected in this relationship. One comes from fear, the other comes from self-respect. And ladies, stop confusing being wanted with being valued. A man can desire you and still not know how to treat you properly. Attention is not commitment. Attraction is not consistency. Chemistry is not character. You have to look beyond what a man says when everything is going well and pay attention to what he does when things become difficult. Knowing your worth means you don't allow temporary attention to make you abandon permanent standards. If you tell yourself that disrespect is unacceptable, don't make an exception just because you are emotionally attached. If you say you need consistency, don't keep making excuses for inconsistency. If you say you want honesty, don't accept lies simply because the truth might hurt. Your standards don't mean much if you abandon them the moment somebody gives you attention. And this applies to communication too. You don't have to turn every disagreement into a war. You can sit across from a man and calmly say, that behavior doesn't work for me. You can say, I don't feel comfortable with this. You can say, I need more communication from you. You can say, I feel like we're becoming disconnected. You don't have to scream it. You don't have to insult him. You don't have to threaten him. You can simply communicate it. A woman who knows her worth understands that her job isn't to convince somebody to value her. Her job is to observe whether somebody naturally does. That's a completely different mindset. You stop chasing explanations and start watching patterns. You stop asking, how can I make him treat me better? And start asking, is this the kind of treatment I am willing to accept? That's where your power comes back, because you cannot control another person's behavior, but you can control your response to it. You can choose what you participate in. You can choose what you tolerate. You can choose when to have a conversation and when to walk away from one. You can choose whether you're going to keep explaining the same boundary to somebody who has already heard you clearly. And never forget that self-respect doesn't mean you think you're better than a man. It means you understand that you're responsible for protecting your own dignity. You can love somebody deeply and still have boundaries. You can care about somebody and still say no. You can forgive somebody and still decide that certain behavior cannot continue. Real confidence doesn't need to announce itself. It shows up in the way you speak, the way you listen, the way you carry yourself, and the way you respond when somebody doesn't give you what you want. A woman who knows her worth doesn't need to manipulate a man into chasing her. She doesn't need to create jealousy to feel important. She doesn't need to disappear just to see whether he'll call. She doesn't need to post something online hoping he'll react. She communicates, she observes, she decides. And when she speaks from a place of certainty rather than fear, because she understands that losing the wrong relationship is not the same thing as losing her value. And choosing herself when necessary is not selfishness, but a recognition that her peace, dignity, and standards are not things she can afford to keep sacrificing just to maintain a relationship that refuses to meet her where she stands. Ladies, if you want a relationship with a man that has real trust, real respect, and real understanding, You have to stop expecting him to read your mind. A man cannot always know what you're thinking just because you've been quiet. He cannot automatically understand what you need because your attitude changed. He cannot decode every hint, every social media post, every delayed response, or every little test you create to see if he really cares. If something is bothering you, say it. If you need something, communicate it. If you feel neglected, explain how you feel. That's not weakness. That's maturity. Too many relationships become complicated because two people are communicating through games instead of words. A woman gets upset but says nothing's wrong. The man believes her and goes about his day. Now she's even more upset because he didn't notice what she refused to explain. Then she says, if you really cared, you would know. No, he may not know, and that's okay. You have to give people the information they need to love you properly. That doesn't mean you should constantly teach a grown man basic respect. It means healthy relationships require honest communication. You can't expect somebody to understand your expectations if you've never clearly expressed them. Don't punish somebody for failing a test you never told them they were taking. If you want more quality time, say that. If you want more affection, communicate that. If you feel like he's becoming distant, don't immediately accuse him of losing interest. Ask him what's happening. Give him an opportunity to explain himself. There's power in saying, I feel like we've been disconnected lately. Is everything okay? That's much stronger than saying, you obviously don't care about me anymore. One opens a door, the other closes one. And ladies, stop using jealousy as communication. Don't mention another man just to make your partner nervous. Don't flirt with somebody else because you want to see whether he gets jealous. Don't post something provocative because you want him to ask who you're talking to. If you have something to say, have the courage to say it directly. You don't need manipulation when you have communication. And don't use silence as a weapon. Sometimes you need space to calm down, and that's completely different. You can say, I'm upset right now, and I need some time before we talk about this. That's healthy. But disappearing for 3 days because you want him to suffer isn't communication. That's punishment. A mature woman doesn't try to make a man suffer so he can understand her pain. She explains the pain. And when you're communicating, listen too. Communication isn't just waiting for your turn to speak. Sometimes you have to hear what the other person is saying even when you don't like it. You may believe you're explaining yourself clearly, but if you're constantly interrupting, acute, or preparing your next response, you aren't listening. Ask questions, clarify, give him a chance to speak. You might discover that what you thought was rejection was stress. What you thought was disrespect was misunderstanding. What you thought was distance was something completely different. That doesn't mean you ignore patterns of bad behavior. It means you don't create conclusions before you have conversations. And here's something important. Speak about the problem without turning the conversation into an attack on the person's entire character. Instead of saying, you are a terrible boyfriend, explain what happened and why it affected you. Instead of saying, you never care about anything, tell him what specific behavior made you feel uncared for. Specific communication gives somebody something they can actually respond to. Gentle insults only create defensiveness. A high-value woman doesn't need to manipulate a man into behaving the way she wants. She communicates her expectations and watches what he does afterward. That's the difference. You tell him what you need. You give him the opportunity to respond, then you observe. Because eventually, communication has to meet action. If you've explained your needs clearly and the same problem continues over and over, the issue may no longer be that he doesn't understand. He may understand perfectly. He simply may not be willing to change. And that's information you need to respect. Don't keep repeating yourself forever, hoping that the next explanation will magically create a different person. Communicate clearly. Give space for understanding. Watch the response and make decisions based on what you consistently see rather than what you desperately hope will happen. Because a healthy relationship doesn't require two people to become mind readers. It requires two people who are willing to speak honestly, listen carefully, and respond to each other's needs with enough maturity that neither person has to keep guessing what the other one is trying to say. Ladies, there is a difference between correcting a man and disrespecting a man. If you want to be a woman who commands respect, you have to understand that your delivery can be just as important as your message. You can have a valid point and still destroy the conversation if you deliver that point with insults, humiliation, or contempt. Being right does not give you permission to be disrespectful. If something bothers you, address the behavior. Don't attack the entire person. There's a difference between saying, "I didn't appreciate the way you spoke to me," and saying, "You're an arrogant, disrespectful man." One addresses what happened. The other attacks his identity. When you attack someone's character, they're probably going to spend the rest of the conversation defending themselves instead of listening to what you're actually trying to communicate. And ladies, you don't need to make a man feel small to make yourself feel powerful. That's not strength. That's insecurity wearing a confident outfit. A strong woman can sit across from a man and tell him the truth without trying to embarrass him. She can say, "That wasn't okay with me." She can say, "I expect to be spoken to with respect." She can say, "If we're going to solve this, we need to talk without insulting each other." That's authority without disrespect. And don't bring an audience into private relationship problems. If you're angry with your man, don't immediately call everybody you know and turn the situation into a public trial. Don't embarrass him in front of his friends. Don't post indirect messages online hoping he'll recognize himself in them. Don't expose private conversations just because you're angry. You may win attention, but you can lose trust. Some conversations belong between two people, and when you're correcting something, be specific. Don't say you always do this. Don't say you never do anything right. Those words make it sound like every positive thing he's ever done has been erased. Talk about the actual situation. When you canceled our plans without telling me, I felt disrespected. That's clear. When you spoke to me like that in front of everybody, I felt embarrassed. That's clear. I need us to communicate before making decisions that affect both of us. That's clear. Now, the man knows exactly what you're talking about. And understand this, correction doesn't mean control. You're not his mother. You're his partner. Your responsibility is not to constantly manage, supervise, or lecture him. If you have to correct every little thing he does, you may need to ask yourself whether you're actually compatible. A relationship shouldn't feel like one person is raising the other. You should be able to communicate expectations, discuss problems, and allow another adult to make choices. And sometimes the strongest correction is not another speech, it's a boundary. You can tell somebody what you will accept, and then you can watch what they do. If a man repeatedly speaks disrespectfully after you've clearly communicated your boundary, you don't need to spend every night giving the same lecture. At some point, his behavior is giving you information, and the same applies to you. If you're asking a man to communicate respectfully, You have to communicate respectfully too. If you're asking him not to insult you during disagreements, you can't turn around and insult him. If you're asking him to listen, you have to listen. Standards become powerful when you practice them yourself. Don't demand from somebody what you refuse to give. And ladies, don't confuse being soft with being weak. You can be gentle and still be firm. You can speak calmly and still mean every word. You can refuse to argue and still refuse to tolerate disrespect. Sometimes lowering your voice makes your message stronger. Sometimes walking away from a pointless argument is more powerful than winning it. Sometimes saying, we're both too emotional right now. Let's talk when we can actually listen is the most mature thing you can do. You don't have to respond to every provocation. You don't have to prove that you can argue louder. You don't have to get the final word. Your goal should be resolution, not victory. Because what good is winning an argument if the relationship loses trust afterward? A high-value woman understands that respect isn't something she demands only when she's being treated well. She maintains her own standards even when she's angry. She doesn't use someone's weaknesses against them. She doesn't bring up painful experiences just to win an argument. She doesn't expose secrets. She doesn't weaponize vulnerability. If a man trusted you enough to tell you something private, don't use that information as ammunition when you're upset. And if the relationship reaches a point where respect has disappeared completely, don't keep pretending that better communication alone can fix everything. Sometimes the healthiest decision is recognizing that two people are no longer able to communicate in a healthy way. But before you reach that point, learn how to speak with firmness without cruelty. Tell the truth without humiliation. Set boundaries without threats. Express disappointment without destruction. Correct the behavior without attacking the person. Because when a woman knows how to communicate that way, she doesn't have to scream to be heard. She doesn't have to insult a man to make him understand. And she doesn't have to tear somebody down just to prove that she deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Ladies, there is a major difference between having standards and trying to control a man. A high-value woman knows what she wants, knows what she will accept, and knows what she will walk away from. But she doesn't believe she has to control another person's every move to feel secure. That's an important distinction because you cannot build a healthy relationship by trying to manage another adult like he's a child. You can communicate your expectations. You can establish boundaries. You can tell a man what matters to you, but you cannot force somebody to become the person you want them to be. And that's where many women get exhausted. They meet a man, see his potential, and immediately start trying to redesign him. They want to change his friends, his habits, his communication style, his schedule, his personality, his priorities, and sometimes everything else that makes him who he is. Ladies, if you have to completely rebuild a man before you can love him, you may not actually love the man standing in front of you. You may be in love with the version you've created in your imagination. Standards say, this is what I need. Control says, you have to do exactly what I say. Standards say, I don't want a relationship where there is dishonesty. Control says, give me your phone every night so I can inspect everything. Standards give somebody a choice. Control tries to remove the choice. And here's the truth. A man who genuinely wants to be with you should be able to hear your standards without feeling like he's entering a prison. You should be able to communicate what makes you feel respected and secure without creating a list of rules for his entire life. If you need consistent communication, tell him. If loyalty is important to you, make that clear. If you don't accept disrespect, communicate that boundary. If you want a serious relationship, don't pretend you're comfortable with something casual just because you're afraid he'll leave. Be honest about what you're looking for. Then pay attention to whether his actions align with it. You don't have to chase him around enforcing your standards. You don't have to monitor every interaction. You don't have to investigate every woman who likes his social media posts. You don't have to compete with every person who enters his environment. If you constantly need surveillance to maintain trust, you may have a trust problem that control cannot solve. And ladies, understand that boundaries are about what you will do, not what you can force somebody else to do. You can say, I won't stay in a relationship where I'm constantly being disrespected. That's a boundary. You cannot say, you are never allowed to disagree with me. That's control. You can say, I need honesty in my relationship. You cannot demand access to every private thought simply because you're dating somebody. You can say, I want a partner who makes time for the relationship. You cannot dictate every minute of his day. There has to be room for individuality. A healthy relationship isn't two people becoming one person. It's two complete people deciding to build a life together while still maintaining their own identity. And that means allowing a man to make choices. Sometimes he'll make choices you wouldn't make. Sometimes he'll approach something differently. Sometimes he'll have an opinion that doesn't match yours. That doesn't automatically mean he's disrespecting you. You don't need to win every disagreement. You need to know which things truly matter. Save your energy for the issues that affect trust, loyalty, respect, commitment, and the health of the relationship. Don't turn every small difference into a major battle. And don't use emotional pressure to control somebody. If you love me, you would. That sentence can become manipulation very quickly. Love doesn't mean automatic obedience. A person can love you and still disagree with you. A person can care about you and still need personal space. A person can be committed to you and still have interests, friendships, goals, and opinions that exist outside the relationship. Give each other room to breathe, because when you stop trying to control every outcome, you gain something much more valuable, information. You get to see who the person really is. If you stop monitoring him, will he still act with integrity? If you stop reminding him to communicate, will he communicate? If you stop forcing affection, will he naturally show love? If you stop chasing him, will he make an effort? Those answers matter. You don't need to control a good man into doing the right thing. A man with character will make good choices even when nobody is watching. And if he consistently refuses to meet your standards, your answer isn't to tighten the rules. Your answer is to decide what you're willing to accept. That's where your power lives. Not in controlling him, not in checking him, not in threatening him, not in trying to make him afraid of losing you. Your power is in knowing that you can love somebody without abandoning yourself. You can give somebody freedom without giving away your standards. You can be understanding without becoming a doormat. You can be patient without accepting endless disrespect. And you can walk away from something that doesn't align with your values without turning the entire situation into a war. Because a woman who knows her worth doesn't need to control a man to feel valuable. She needs clarity about what she wants, courage to communicate it, discipline to maintain her boundaries, and enough self-respect to accept what someone's choices are telling her, rather than constantly trying to change those choices through pressure, fear, jealousy, or manipulation. Ladies, One of the biggest mistakes you can make in a relationship is believing everything somebody says while ignoring everything they do. Words matter, but actions tell you where a person's priorities really are. A man can tell you that he loves you every morning, but if his behavior constantly leaves you feeling ignored, disrespected, or unimportant, you have to pay attention to the pattern instead of getting trapped in the promise. A high-value woman listens to what a man says, but she watches what he consistently does. She doesn't become impressed by one good week after months of bad behavior. She doesn't allow one romantic gesture to erase a long history of inconsistency. She looks at the complete picture because consistency is what builds trust. If a man says you're important to him, does he make time for you? If he says he respects you, does he respect your boundaries when he's angry? If he says he wants a future with you, does his behavior support that future? If he says he's committed, does his lifestyle reflect commitment? These aren't questions you answer by listening harder. They're questions you answer by observing. And ladies, this doesn't mean you should become suspicious of everything. It doesn't mean you should analyze every text message or investigate every little detail. It means you should stop ignoring obvious patterns because you desperately want a particular outcome. There's a difference between being patient and making excuses. There's a difference between giving someone grace and constantly defending behavior that keeps hurting you. Everybody has a bad day. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody can fall short sometimes. A healthy relationship gives people room to be human. But when the same behavior keeps happening after you've clearly communicated how it affects you, you have to take that information seriously. And here's where your own standards come into the picture. Don't demand from a man what you refuse to give him. If you want honesty, be honest. If you want loyalty, be loyal. If you want respect, communicate respectfully. If you want consistency, be consistent yourself. You can't build a healthy relationship by keeping a scoreboard of what he owes you while ignoring what you contribute. A high-value woman asks herself difficult questions too. Am I communicating clearly? Am I keeping my promises? Am I respecting his boundaries? Am I appreciating his effort? Am I listening when he tells me something matters to him? That's maturity, because relationships aren't built by one person making demands while the other person constantly adjusts. Both people have responsibilities. Both people have feelings. Both people deserve respect. And don't underestimate appreciation. If a good man is showing up for you, recognize it. Tell him you appreciate his effort. Let him know when something he did made a difference. Appreciation isn't submission. It doesn't make you less powerful. It tells somebody that their effort is visible. People naturally want to continue investing where they feel valued. But appreciation doesn't mean accepting anything just because someone occasionally does something nice. A bouquet of flowers doesn't cancel disrespect. A romantic dinner doesn't erase dishonesty. An apology doesn't mean anything if the same behavior continues without change. Look for patterns, not performances. Anybody can behave well when they're trying to win you. Character becomes clearer when there is nothing immediate to gain. Watch how he handles disappointment. Watch how he handles disagreement. Watch how he treats people who cannot benefit him. Watch how he behaves when he's stressed. Watch whether his promises survive inconvenience. And while you're watching him, don't forget to watch yourself. Are you becoming the kind of woman you said you wanted to become? Are you maintaining your dignity? Are you keeping your boundaries? Are you speaking from confidence or fear? Are you choosing a relationship because it genuinely fits your values or because you're afraid of being alone? Those questions can change everything. A woman who knows her value doesn't need to convince herself that a bad situation is good just because she invested time in it. Time invested doesn't automatically mean something deserves more time. Sometimes the lesson is valuable even when the relationship isn't. And if a man consistently demonstrates that he cannot meet the standards you've clearly communicated, believe what you're seeing. Don't spend years trying to convince somebody to become ready for a relationship they aren't prepared to build. At the same time, give people room to grow when their actions demonstrate genuine effort. Nobody gets everything right. A good relationship isn't about perfection. It's about accountability, improvement, honesty, and two people who are willing to recognize when they are wrong and do something different. That's the difference between a mistake and a pattern. A mistake can be acknowledged. A pattern has to be confronted. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop arguing with reality. If somebody keeps showing you who they are, you don't have to hate them. You don't have to insult them. You don't have to expose them. You don't have to create revenge stories. You simply have to accept the information, because your standards aren't supposed to be a speech you give other people. They're supposed to be principles you live by. If you say you value respect, live respectfully. If you say you value loyalty, practice loyalty. If you say you want honesty, be honest even when the truth is uncomfortable. If you say you want a mature relationship, become mature enough to have mature conversations. The woman who lives by her standards doesn't have to constantly announce them. Her decisions reveal them. And when your behavior matches what you expect from somebody else, you stop asking for treatment you haven't demonstrated yourself. You become clear about what you bring, clear about what you require, and clear enough to recognize the difference between somebody who occasionally says the right thing and somebody whose everyday actions consistently show you what kind of person they are.